Hello everyone. So we come to one more conversation about getting ready for industry. I think this is important to cover because as you folks, many of your students, as you finish your education or if you're looking at getting into industry, you should be thinking about how do industries work, what sort of skills do they want. It's not necessarily about skills in the job description, but also what additional skills would they look for and can you do something in advance to get yourself ready for the workforce? We'll talk about it. If you are a professional, you will still learn from this because you'll get a review of some of the very basic skills required in a workplace. It doesn't matter whether you're engineer, senior engineer, manager, director. I think there's some very common skills required. We'll review some of the skills and maybe you can reflect on do you have these skills? If not, you can maybe try to gain some skills before you enter a job. We'll be talking a little bit about what are some common modes of communication, right? How do you pick the right way to communicate with people in a workplace? We'll talk about that in some amount of detail. We'll get into how to have effective meetings, how to have structured, meaningful meetings where you play a very positive role. We'll talk about some common bottlenecks we encounter and how do you deal with one-on-one conversations. Okay, firstly, we'll get into what are some common modes of communication. As you enter a workplace, there are so many ways for you to communicate with the folks around you, right? So there are face-to-face meetings which will happen all the time if you are in office. If you are remote, then it's different because then you're probably going to be stuck with, say, phone calls. You're going to be stuck with instant messaging. You're probably going to be making online presentations and so on. So what I want you folks to all reflect on is everybody brings something unique about them to the table. Everybody has a certain personality type they bring to the table, and sometimes matching the way you relate with them is going to help you be more effective in the workplace. So ideally, I would say, for example, let's take this topic of face-to-face meetings. This is meant for people who are extroverts by nature. They like that interactions where you meet each other, have conversations, talk to them, catch up for tea, catch up for lunch, and so on. That's really where face-to-face meetings helps a lot. It is meant for extroverts. It's meant for people-oriented folks. Likewise, if you're looking at phone calls, the difference between phone calls and say Zoom sessions, for example, is that if you're having a phone call, you're not really able to see the person on the other end, right? You're only looking at you're hearing the voice, you're not able to look at the person directly. So it is again good for auditory learners. A lot of people are sometimes not very comfortable with having their video on. They may be more comfortable with switching off their Zoom videos, right, and having conversations. So if you can identify maybe some group of extroverts who are auditory learners, which means that they are very comfortable talking but not necessarily in one-to-one communications. If there's a group of people who match that category, phone call is better than face-to-face meetings. And you will encounter a lot of them. Even if you're remote, for example, you will meet people who maybe are not ready for Zoom meetings and you'll have to have phone conversations with them. Instant messaging is a very good tool. You can just like Slack and other tools where you message each other. It's good for people who are interested in technology or good in using technology because Slack will basically show you when a person is free or not free, like every single minute. You know exactly what other people are doing. So some people are very comfortable using it. Some people are not comfortable using it. So try to work with people in the way they prefer to work with. Some people may like phone calls. Some people may say, hey, let's have face-to-face meetings. Let's not do IM. Some people will say, let's do IM. Let's not have face-to-face meetings. So depending on how far they are from you and what they want, try to optimize your ways of communication. Presentations are really good, but it's again meant for visual learners. Sometimes before presentations, you may have to have a conversation to debrief folks, tell them about what is it you want to do, and then jump into presentations. So it's meant for visual learners, right? I mean, that's really the target of presentations. It's a bunch of other things like video conferencing, Zoom, we talked about that earlier. Again, it's meant for people who are very comfortable at putting themselves up in a screen, right, and talking about it. And if a person is regularly switching off their video when it comes to video conferencing, that's a signal to you that maybe they're not comfortable with it. They're more comfortable having a phone call. So try to read those signals from people when you have conversations. As you look at email, that's a very good way to communicate, but it's typically meant for people who do not want to come online, who don't want to be called, who don't prefer IM. Maybe sometimes emails work. Now, this could be someone who's pretty high in the organization. For example, the CEO of the company or a senior VP in the company. You may not be able to meet them. You may not be able to set up time with them, but then you can always send emails to them, right? So that's a great way to communicate with these people. There are also a bunch of project management tools. Again, project management tools is all about dividing work, communication, and so on. So it's all about being organized. So if you have people who meet that criteria, that's fantastic. Then you can use the right tools to communicate with each other. Social media is something a lot of companies have many thoughts about. They're not comfortable with social media, many companies. So do read the social media policy of companies. I've been in companies where, for example, folks communicate with each other on social media, and I always found it a little uncomfortable. That's just in my nature. So it depends on what your group wants, what your team wants, what the company wants. So be aware of the social media policy. It could be very extrovertish, and one problem with social media is that whatever you put out there, the entire world can see. So you never want to put up something which either shows you in poor light or shows a company in bad light. So think of social media that way. You only want to put up stuff which you can 100% assume that somebody from your company is going to these social media posts. So be very thoughtful about what you put up on social media. Once you leave the company, it's a different conversation. But if you're working in a company, you have to present both yourself and your client, which is your company, in a good light. As maybe shift gears, talk about some ways by which you can conduct effective meetings. Presentations. What should you be doing to get better at presentations? Prepare in advance, like before you go for a meeting. Take 10 minutes before the meeting to have a list of thoughts, read some material, whatever happened in the earlier meeting, what is the follow-up, check, review, be ready for meetings, right? Do not walk unprepared into meetings. Review what happened earlier and get in. Once you get into the meeting, take notes. I think that's also important. If there is some work you're giving to someone during the meeting, do not surprise them, because sometimes in a presentation, in a meeting, it's very uncomfortable for somebody to say no in front of a large audience. So ideally, if you're going to give work, make sure there's no surprises, that everybody's aware of what is it you want to do before the meeting begins. And again, always make sure that you have the right notes with you, because you don't want to be making mistakes there. You may have meetings with your managers. That is one more place where you've got to probably meet them on a weekly basis. So make sure that there is a right format for manager meetings that you use. Use one format, use that consistently. Make sure that you begin with what happened in earlier meetings. What is it you want to discuss today? What are some of the red flags you have? Where is it that you're facing problems in your work? List all these categories in a very clear manner, and prepare in advance before you sit in for manager meetings. Like managers expect you to share the weekly results with them and be ready with as many data points as possible. Do not surprise them in any way. Email, again, one important thing is when you write emails, we'll share some examples, but be precise. And if there's a follow-up to be done, list it down separately, because sometimes when the emails are long, people forget that what do you write in the emails, what is it you want to convey. So use bullet points, convey clearly if there's some action to be done, mention clearly what is the action, who has got to get it done, and by what time it has got to be done. That should be very clear in the emails. Let's take an example. So look at this email we have in front of us, right? I mean, I created some fancy names just to help you folks understand. So look at this email, and you will see that there are maybe some of the points underlined in red, some of the points underlined in green. Take maybe a minute, read the email, and try to guess why I underlined certain things and in red, and why some certain ones in green. Pause. Look at this for like a couple of seconds. Okay, so if you've gone through this email and read that very carefully, you'll find that it's very important for you to look at like how emails come across. So for example, when you have the subject, it should be very clear what are you referring to. When you just say important project, is that enough? Shouldn't you give more information about what is it you want to convey about this email? Your email should have some essence inbuilt into it. It should convey some meaning when looking at the subject. So that's something you want to check. When you are copying people, make sure that you do not blind copy people in the email, because that's not appropriate behavior, because the people in the to bucket will not know who the people in the BCC are. So that's a very bad practice. If you're going to name people, name them specifically. Don't say and others, right? If you're saying dear so-so and others, just be thoughtful about not using the word others. And then if you say, for example, that you heard from some of your software architects certain things, be very clear about whom you heard it from, right? You should not look as if you are listening to gossip from across the company and then relaying it to the top management. So make sure that you tell exactly how you heard it. Do you have a copy? Do you have some evidence to share? Do you have some email proof to share? And what did you hear, right? Make these things very explicit. The ones in green are actually a good practice. Like for example, initially you begin with acknowledging some help you got from people around you. So thank you for the quick feedback. So that's a good way to begin a conversation. If you're talking about details, the more technical you can get into, I think that's a good practice. If you have some follow-up items, if you're listing it down in order, that's also good practice. If you have some, for example, you list down the actions, say who has to follow up and by which date, that's also a very good practice. Closing by saying that you're going to set up a separate meeting session by so-and-so time, all that are very good practices. And offering to be of help anytime, these are also good practices. So again, there are some good practices. So try to learn from some similar emails and try to optimize the way you send emails inside a company. We'll talk briefly about some of team dynamics. We'll talk a little bit of like what do you do during meetings, after meetings. So I think these things are very critical. So firstly, when you enter a team, understand that there's going to be a lot of cultural differences. So be aware of all the cultural differences out there. I would personally say that try to have a video session with your video on. That's a very good practice. Try not to switch off a video, because inside a company, it's already difficult for each person to communicate with each other. And if you're switching off a video, it becomes extremely tough for the other person to read your body language. So the more body language you display, the more comfortable others would be. So switch on your video camera as much as possible. Be clear about the communication channels you use and which ones you're more comfortable with. Ensure there's enough documentation. Whenever people ask you for feedback, make sure you respond to them on time. The response time should be really good. Make sure that you follow the right etiquette and not disrupt others. Similarly, before meetings happen, make sure that if you're having stand-up meetings, establish the note taker. If you want to have some fun events with your team members, you be the lead, you be the organizer trying to put all these things together. Do not wait for others to come and take the lead. Likewise, during meetings, we talked about active listening. If you're in front of a meeting, listen, right? You don't get distracted by working on a laptop, by fiddling on a laptop. This is not a good practice. So when you are in a meeting, show that you're listening, show that you care about what the meeting is. Take notes. I think these things give a message that you're very serious about the meetings. If there's a follow-up to be done, minutes to be taken, make sure that you are sometimes a note taker, and these things always present a very positive view about yourself. Invite people to talk. Sometimes some people talk in conversations, most people do not talk in conversations. So if you see some people not talking, sometimes you being the person to ask others to contribute can send a very strong signal in your favor. There's something called Gantt charts or progress charts, which talk about progress of projects. So instead of saying, for example, that there are 10 projects running and this is the status verbally, you may just want to pull up a graph and show a Gantt chart, G-A-N-T-T. So if you show a Gantt chart, you can pretty much show what the progress is, what the deadlines are, whether you're ahead of projects or behind projects. So these things can be conveyed very easily. After the meeting, always ask for feedback. For example, you may have made mistakes without you knowing it, right? So after every couple of meetings, for example, you're talking to your manager. Every month, ask them, hey, give me some feedback on how I'm doing. Am I doing well? Am I not doing well? What should I improve? People love others who ask for feedback. So be open to getting feedback. And when you have virtual chat sessions, participate, right? I mean, don't, for example, if there's a group session, don't be the person staying out of these sessions. Do participate eagerly. Make sure that sometimes if you want to get feedback from other people, you may want to send anonymous feedback forms, and sometimes people who are uncomfortable sharing feedback with you directly may actually share feedback with you anonymously. So be open to it. And if you want to share critical feedback with other people, what I highly recommend is that you don't do it openly in front of others. So there's a little bit of losing face in front of other people. So do it privately. These things make you look as a dependable, reliable friend. Okay, let's talk about one-on-one meetings. So what do you do when you meet people? So critical things, again, so 4 points I want you to think about seriously is focus on outcome. When you have a conversation, don't just go on talking about things, right? Focus on exactly why is it that you're having the conversation. Talk about the outcome first, those are important. If somebody's talking, ask good questions, ask thoughtful questions, well-prepared questions. They also make you stand out. If somebody says, hey, follow up, get back to me, send me an email after this, please do that follow up, right? These things are absolutely required. And the more prepared you are, the better it is for you. Body language, I'm not going to repeat whatever we talked about earlier. I spent the entire session talking about body language, but key thing is be relaxed, move your hands. If you're seated, have open gestures. If you're standing, stand tall, have a good posture, be confident. Sometimes people tend to have very low voice. I've seen that many students, especially early on in career, they tend to speak very slowly and they kind of whisper to themselves. Try to project a voice a little, maybe increase your tone by one notch, make yourself a little louder, and that can make you understood really well. So to sum up a bunch of the things we discussed so far, we tried to all put it all together. Take notes, be open-minded, try to maintain eye contact during conversations. These things help a lot. Be aware of non-verbal cues in terms of how you can be perceived by other people, even if you do not mean things in a certain way. Don't go fidgeting around, playing with laptops when you're talking to people, part of meetings. Strict no, that it's something you absolutely should not be doing. Again, if suppose someone gives you critical feedback, don't always take it personally, right? Try to look at things from a different perspective. Switch perspective, look at yourself from a different person's point of view and see how you could have come across differently. And if you can sometimes switch perspective, you could be a better person. Ask questions, don't always jump to solutions. That's a good way to work when you're within a big group of people. Relax, don't interrupt meetings, don't ask, be thoughtful about where you introduce yourself during a large group meetings, right? That's very important. And if you're not understood something, please ask questions again and again. Ask them to rephrase, or maybe you can try paraphrasing and rephrasing. So if somebody tells you something, if you don't understand, please ask them repeatedly to rephrase till you understand what the issue is. Storytelling is one huge component of getting promoted and shining in a company. Everybody likes a story, so come up with compelling narratives, use descriptive, colorful language, share personal stories about yourself. These are great ways to connect and also make a personal bond with the audience. So people tend to bond not necessarily with the message, but always with emotions. So for example, if you watch a lot of presidential debates, right, you can see that they always share something personal about themselves when they talk to people, and that's necessarily done for a reason, because the moment you talk something about yourself and share something positive, then the audience is able to reciprocate much better, instead of you just talking about numbers and facts all the time. The more you practice, the better you're going to be. I wanted to talk something about a sandwich feedback when we deal with people, especially when we're giving critical feedback, because the best feedback should always be done in a manner of constructive criticism, right? When you're giving feedback or receiving feedback, try not to destroy people, right? That's not the idea of working in companies. So a couple of things. One is that you should mean well for the person you're giving feedback. That's assume positive intent. That person should think positively about you. They should be open to getting feedback about you. Second thing is that you don't want to just run down the person and break them down, right? You need to bring them up again. You need to point out the flaws, but at the same time say how they can work on it and get better. So it's always about the model you approach with, and it's always about positive, constructive feedback. That's very important. So it's not necessarily about identifying a problem and saying this went wrong. You should also be saying how the person could have done better, right? That's also important. There's some feedback called a sandwich model of feedback, which I think is a great way to begin a conversation. Suppose you're meeting someone, having a conversation. Begin with something positive in the beginning, right? So begin a conversation with something positive. Say something good about what you noticed about the person. Give your feedback, the critical feedback, and always end with something positive. So it's positive, negative, positive. Try to follow that model, and many a time it works, because especially in Indian companies, don't jump in with critical feedback, right? Say something positive, share your negative feedback, and always close with something positive, and it makes it more palatable and something which the other person is also going to understand and absorb. So this slide is about the fact that in any company you go to, if you have a large group of people, they're necessarily going to fall into three different camps. There's one group of people who will never agree with you on whatever you do, right? They're going to be the perpetual skeptics. Even a CEO in a company, right? Nobody's going to agree with the CEO on each and every proposal. There are always going to be people who will doubt you. Those are the skeptics. There's going to be a group of people in the center called followers, who, with a little bit of nudge, they'll easily follow you, right? But you've got to do a little bit of homework to get them on your side. But they will follow you if you put in them some effort. And there are some early adopters. These people are very, very interested in change. So whatever ideas one comes forward with, they're ready to jump in. So you will find people who oppose you. Those people are extremely in favor of you, and some people are kind of neutral in the middle. This is three groups of people you'll find in any company you're in. So something I want to talk about is, so is there a different model you can apply to approach each one of these groups? That's something which we will try to discuss. I would say the best way to approach these skeptics who are not necessarily aligned with you is that you want to talk about the fact that there's going to be a bunch of consequences because of the changes you're proposing. And if they do not get on board, there could be some issues down the line. So you're trying to create consensus by talking about scarcity. You're talking about, hey, there's going to be limited resources, there's going to be limited budgets, and if this doesn't happen now, it'll never happen again, right? You want to create a culture of scarcity to get some of these people in. With the next group, which is the followers and thinkers, again, it's about the fact that you have people backing you, senior management backing you, they're aligned. So trying to talk about authority, trying to talk about a project being done within a certain deadline in terms of commitment and consistency, this can help those folks come to your side. Early adopters is pretty easy as long as you're comfortable with them on a one-on-one basis. You have some personal bonds with them. If you can if you all like the same common things, if you can reciprocate actions, if you had some close ties with each people, one-on-one ties, you caught up with them for lunch, you catch up with them regularly. These are easy ways to get the early adopters on your side. So depending on how people are, come up with a strategy to deal with them. So this is an example of confrontation, right? For example, if you're going to meet somebody, like I said, always try to do confrontation private, do not do it publicly, and focus not on the person, don't attack the person, right? Attack the behavior, what went wrong and how you can constructively change it. So this is an example, read this in more detail where you're giving feedback, but you want to do it in a very respectful tone. You want to make sure that the person understands exactly in terms of like, it was the behavior at fault, not the person themselves. So just go through this. Pause, go through this, and you will see how critical feedback can be done in such a way that it can appear very constructive. So we'll close with this slide where we talk about some takeaways as you enter a company, right? Don't have too much of an attitude when you join a company. You are there to learn, so just be open to learning. So don't shed negative attitudes when you encounter people in a company. Most newcomers, especially campus hires, are going to begin right at the bottom of the company hierarchy. So don't think that you're better than other people in the company. I think you are at the bottom, so just live with it, right? That's the sad nature of how things are. And you will grow, you will do better in your lives. But everyone begins at the bottom and works their way upwards. Maybe you are a class topper, maybe you're a scholarship holder, you're a fantastic person, and so on. But nobody really cares about your past when you enter a company. You have to prove yourself in the workplace, right? So that's really how you get respect within a company. It's about proving yourself. So how do you prove yourself? Be sincere, be enthusiastic, always volunteer to do additional work. These things will always help you. Work hard, be prepared to be seen as working hard. Sometimes people work hard but don't care about other perceptions, but that's not right? You should care about how your manager perceives you. When you make promises, try to stick to it as much as possible. Be known as Mr. Reliable or Mrs. Dependable, so as much as like the more people can trust you, the more they're going to take you seriously. Respect people at work and be ready to learn every day, right? As long as you're willing to learn from your mistakes, you will have a fantastic time working in a company. Okay, folks, we come to the end of your conversation, and hopefully all of you learned enough tips to do a fantastic job in the workplace. Cheers.